I suppose on that note, it can be a tricky question, but what is a terrorist? How is it? How is it different from someone who's the dichotomy is usually a terrorist or freedom fighter. But yeah, for you, where's the line between like a terrorist and someone who someone who's just fighting for the freedom of their country as they see it?
It's in the eyes of the beholder. It's an entirely subjective description. The cliche one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, and vice versa. But it's a phenomenon which isn't unique to our generation. When you look at the history of Rhodesia that becomes Zimbabwe, when you look at Robert Mugabe, who becomes, he was the terrorist in Rhodesia. When you look at the history of the state of Israel, that the Israeli quotes terrorists to us, freedom fighters to the Israelis, terrorists to the Palestinians. It's an entirely subjective term, but it's what is in the head of those who are accused of being terrorists that really matters. If you believe that what you're doing is justified, and I think this is one of the things I wrote about in Beating the Terrorists, if you believe that what you're doing is legitimate and right, the cause is right. Nelson Mandela, there's a whole list of former quotes terrorists who become peacemakers, and Martin McGuinness was, quotes, these aren't my words, arch terrorist, public enemy number one, because of his past. But he remarkably was instrumental, along with Gerry Adams, in convincing the IRA that the only way forward to achieve their goal, its goal of uniting Ireland, was to give up the armed struggle and concentrate politically, which is why the rise of Sinn Féin is so important and effectively generated by the hunger strike and Bobby Sands' election to Westminster. And so, when you look at some of the individuals who've been involved in politics in Northern Ireland, who've been members of the Northern Ireland Assembly and ministers, people like Jerry Kelly, they were regarded as terrorists, and then they became, individuals running government departments. So they were terrorist quotes then because of what they were doing, but they were no longer terrorists because they embraced politics. So, it's a legitimate question to which there is no simple answer. It's subjective, and it's in the eyes of the beholder and in the minds of the beholden, if you like.
Interesting. The definition that Google will give, I'm reading it now, is a person who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. That for me would be, that's sort of how I would look at it. Like in my opinion, like the IRA members who do car bombs and kill innocent people and so on, they are terrorists. But the ones to my view, who would just target like military, political, intelligence members, I wouldn't put them in the same category as those who blow up a car bomb in a civilian area and so on. It's funny. I spoke to I don't know if you read the book. There's a book called The Yank, written by an ex-IRA man called John Crawley, who moved to Ireland when he was like in his teens. He became a Marine and then the IRA. And I asked him the same question, and he said to me that there's no definition of terrorism that you couldn't apply to like a lot of the members of the British intelligence and British Army and so on. They were using violence against, or at least facilitating violence against innocent people in the pursuit of a political aim. Does that definition does that do anything for you?
I think the key element in trying to determine, what is a terrorist and what is a freedom fighter is the legislation. the legislation says terrorism is using violence to achieve a political end. And in each of these cases that I've studied, although the ends are very different, I mean, the goal of Al Qaeda and ISIS that I've looked at also in considerable detail is very different from the rather simple goal of wanting a united Ireland, or, as far as the loyalist paramilitaries are concerned, maintaining the relationship with there is behind all quotes terrorism a political motivation. Now, the question is that justified? Well, if you're a person who is regarded as a terrorist, regards it as being justified to commit these killings and these attacks to bring the ultimate goal of united Ireland closer, then it takes some persuading of him or her to change their mind. And again, coming back to Operation Chiffon, that traces how and why that transformation within the IRA mindset, and in particular the mindset of the leadership, notably Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, which is then passed down to the rank and file and the local IRA commanders north and south of the border. But it's the political motivation which is the key thing. Now, arguably, unarguably, nothing justifies planting car bombs in Belfast like the IRA did after Bloody Sunday in 1972. And it's difficult to describe that in terms other than a terrorist act. You're right in making the distinction between targeting innocent civilians, which I've been criticized for saying, was not official IRA policy because it didn't really make sense. But it happened. And therefore, yes, deliberately were innocent civilians targeted and killed. But by and large, and there are notable exceptions, as I have repeatedly stated, the aim was to target military and establishment figures, members of government, anything that represented the British establishment, political and military, will be regarded by the IRA as, quote, legitimate targets, even down to work who were repairing RUC stations that the IRA had bombed were deemed to be political targets because they were mending the damage done by the IRA to British bases. So it was it was extended in a I'm looking for the word, almost duplicitous way to extend the category of legitimate targets. And it's a very uncomfortable, killing people in the way that the IRA and other such organizations have done is awful. It sort of turns my blood cold in many cases, but it happens. And I've always tried in my work over 50 odd years is to try and understand why that happens. And once you understand why it happens, then you can begin to come to terms with what you have to do to bring it to an end, which again brings us back to Operation Chiffon and the Good Friday Agreement.